Okay.
Hello. Hello, everyone. It's not on, right? Okay, I just want to remind all of you, but some of you don't know yet.
Okay, good.
This coming Saturday night, so we from last night, at 6:30 p.m., we are going to be having another preeminent scholar. This guy's one preeminent scholar that's this afternoon. Dr. Daniel Matt, who is the most prominent scholar in the world today regarding the Zohar, which is a mystical commentary to the Torah from the 14th century. And he has quite a few years ago now, actually translated the entire Zohar. And it is a modern translation and it's incredible. Anyway, he is going to be here at Temple Sinai Saturday night at 6:30 p.m. We're able to bring him over here. He's actually starting residence at B'nai Torah in Boca, but he's coming here before going back to Berkeley on Sunday morning. It's free of charge, and so you're all welcome to come. If you can give us some idea of how many people might be here, because we already sent us some handouts. But anyway, it should be real. It should prove to be an incredible evening. And as I wrote in my message, which you'll see later this week, so I'll give you a preview of that. Let me ask you, some of you already might have plans for Saturday night. Well, at 6:30 p.m. on Saturday night, let me tell you, I'm sure you would cancel your plans. Well, Dr. Matt is not Taylor Swift, but it's worth it. And now, here he is. Yes.
Is it going to be on Zoom?
Yes, we're going to be able to, right?
So no,
Oh, no, sorry.
it'll be available afterwards
It'll be
on
recorded.
YouTube. It'll be recorded. If you want to see it live, you got to come in person. But it will be available later.
Okay, we're starting? We starting now?
Yeah. Is it
Okay.
3 o'clock?
Are you 3 o'clock? Well, this man needs no introduction. And Sid Wartel is not only a friend of all of ours, but also the temple's, I was gonna say litigator, but you're hopefully not a litigator, right? Litigator, yes. But he watches over us legally, but he really is someone who takes all of his experiences and education and tries to develop programs that will be of interest and help to all of us. So, Sid, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so we all will have a wonderful and certainly, definitely educational afternoon. Sid Wartel.
Now I hope I can live up to that generous introduction. They tell me I'm too loud, which is unusual lately. My voice used to be a very strong voice and I could go into court and project and scare the hell out of the judge with my voice alone. Those days are long gone.
I'm trying to do
Lucky
something
I can
else.
speak loud enough. People
Not well, but I can do a few
If
things.
you don't, or if you do not understand, please call it to my attention. I will repeat myself and I will take some fast medication to make sure I don't repeat
That's
myself.
not.
Bad joke, sorry. But that's my problem. And that's what used to happen when I would teach, is what I learned the hard way is that if you keep your students entertained and tell them jokes from time to time, they will actually pay attention to what you're saying. So if I salt and pepper this with some jokes, that's the reason behind it. I could never get out of that habit, as the nun said. And given where we are, the idea is that I want to combine two things that are happening in the world today. One is artificial intelligence, and the other is the ethics of Judaism and how they really should interface and eventually may. One of the things people are worried about with artificial intelligence is they believe it will destroy the world. Let me call to your attention the fact that every technology advance from the days of the Industrial Revolution, probably actually going back to the founding of fire in the knife, everybody thought the world is changing, it's now coming to an end. It hasn't happened yet. It could happen, but it could also happen from tornadoes, asteroids, which wiped out the dinosaurs. So it could happen anyway. It has nothing to do with technology. Electricity was used to, in fact, it was just a celebration of this. Believe it or not, I don't call it a celebration, but it was the 100th anniversary of the execution of an elephant because they could find no way to put a dangerous elephant down in 100 years ago. So they used electricity to electrocute it, and it killed the elephant instantly. That's electricity that we use today to light our houses, to cook our food, to light our streets, and to provide power for our radios and televisions. Now, artificial intelligence is going to change that. Believe it or not, I'm going to switch back and forth now between talking about artificial intelligence and Jewish law. One of the first and most important things we have to understand is that you can make something illegal, but it doesn't stop people from doing it. So we can outlaw all kinds of things when it comes to artificial intelligence. Just like outlawing murder, robbery, and a few other things like extortion and stealing money from people, it doesn't stop people from doing it. It provides punishment, it provides a route, and it tells society, you're not supposed to do that. But it doesn't stop it. And that's the only thing I can tell you where law actually fails. Where Judaism, by its ethics, actually surpasses typical civil law that way. Because we impose a moral code on people through Judaism. And that's what I'm hoping, that I'm going to be able to compare what happens with artificial intelligence and Jewish moral code. So we start with, can artificial intelligence be involved in Judaism? Well, it certainly can. But do we want it to replace a rabbi? Would you like to have a robot up in your bima delivering the sermon?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going there. You gave the right answer. It depends.
Might be cheaper.
And here is the key example of why we can't. We have somebody with a neshama, somebody with a heart and a soul delivering our sermons and explaining to us. You can't do that with AI. As good as AI is, you can't instill in it a soul, a neshama, a nefesh. It's not there. A rabbi has that. Now, ironically, they have tried to do that into an AI and set up a robot with artificial intelligence that actually became involved with teenagers, thinking they were going to promote the use of the AI and help the teenagers psychologically, because now it had something to talk to that supposedly responded. I'm not sure if we have any pediatricians in our group today. We frequently do, but children need support. Can you give the child support with artificial intelligence? Well, the interesting and sad story was this child became so emotionally involved with the robot that was powered by artificial intelligence, the kid committed suicide when he couldn't get a response. It was in the news. It's not as if let me rephrase that. It was on the internet. That doesn't make it right. That doesn't mean it really happened. It means I read it on the internet. And we always talk about the difference between plagiarism and research. Research is when you take your information from 100 people. Plagiarism is when you take it from one. And what we try to do is learn from everybody that's involved in artificial intelligence. Now, people think it's very new. It's not. Artificial intelligence first came into the public scene, I think it was 1955. And it was based on things we actually did with robotics. For example, in the early days of robotics, when we had a nuclear failure, we didn't send people into the sites. We sent a robot into the site. Robots don't care if they get irradiated. They glow. That's about it. When you do things like that, you learn that there are things that can be improved. Everything that comes about in intelligence is a statement of what they found wrong and then learn to improve it. So, for example, if you look at your cell phone today, you have more computing power in that cell phone that you carry than the first missile launch I was ever involved with in the 1960s. And to tell you what kind of missile I'm talking about, these were nuclear missiles. We had less power, less capability launching that nuclear missile than you have in your pocket today in a cell phone. And that's where society advances. So now we talk about what is the Jewish ethic of this. Jewish ethics tells us in both the Torah and Talmud that justice you shall pursue. It's a second aspect of it is that the law of the land, the law where you live, is the law that you as a Jew should be observing. It's adina, something like that. I can never quote it. My Hebrew is not as good as my wife's. Believe it or not, she teaches me Hebrew. And I lived in Israel for a short time, very short time. And given a lot of this, we see how the ethics is going to control. But remember, we can teach ethics. We can't enforce ethics. Few lawyers here that I see understand this better than most people. You try to tell your client what the correct procedure will be to follow the rules of ethics. They do it, you're lucky. It's like talking to a child. They have filters. They filter out about a third of what you say, and you never know which third that's going to be. So given that now, the other thing we look at is what the artificial intelligence can do that's right. Many things, too numerous to even mention. I will talk about a few. We know that artificial intelligence can help deal with the medical profession. We know that particular types of x-rays can be read by artificial intelligence at some point actually better than a human. We know that certain types of breast cancer have been better found with artificial intelligence reading the x-rays. And that includes sending it to India for the Indian physicians to review for you, which is where many of them go. We do know that artificial intelligence can also do a false image, however. So what we used to say as young lawyers, as young engineers, that if you saw a photograph, you knew that was really true. Nowadays, you don't. Nowadays, there is software under artificial intelligence that can actually take a clothed individual, undress that individual, and publish the photograph as if it's an original. And there are children blackmailing each other. Children are actually blackmailing each other with that type of thing. And the reason I talk about children is because they're our next most influential part of society. They're going to take care of us as we age. We want them educated. We don't want them subject to things that happen incorrectly. Given that, what else can happen? Well, we can have false news, and we do constantly. I sort of semi-jokingly said I saw it on the internet, and I don't know whether it's true, but that's partially true. You don't know what is being broadcast. Artificial intelligence can take my voice, broadcast it as if it's real, and make it sound like I've taken a different position than the one I actually take. On the ethics side of Judaism, under Talmud, you cannot falsely represent another person. It is specifically stated in Talmud, do not misrepresent other people. Much of Talmud is now into modern law, which people don't even realize. Most of our modern law is based on biblical law and truthfully, Hammurabi Code, which predated Talmud, but Talmud is based much on that. Given that, the Talmud tells us that when somebody is damaged, whoever causes the damage is responsible to make that person whole. So Talmud even gives us tort law and tells us if somebody falsely represents something using AI, doesn't use the term AI, but it says if something is falsely represented, the person who does that is liable for damages. And they're very specific about the types of damages. Talmud talks about personal injury, meaning physical damage, loss of work. If you are kept from working, Talmud says that's damage. Talmud also says that if you are shamed, if somebody embarrasses you, that's damage. These are all concepts that we think are modern concepts that are not. The entire court system that we use today came from Moses' father-in-law. He said there should be a lower court system where you hear basic minor complaints, then an appellate system where you review those, and finally, the final decision maker, Moses and God, as to what the right decision should be. It actually set up the Court of Lower Hearing, the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Final Judgment. And that all comes from Talmud and Torah. So Jewish law is so far advanced compared to anything else in the world. The problem, like everything else, is enforcing it. Is God going to come down and say, I don't think Sydney did that right. I'm going to punish him for it. I'll put him in jail for a couple of weeks. Or I'll make him live with some people he doesn't like. It's all in what society is willing to accept. And we have to consider that that is where artificial intelligence intersects with the legal system. So as I said on the introduction, just because we make something illegal or tell people you shouldn't do that, doesn't mean they're going to stop doing it. Now, what kind of enforcement do we have under Jewish law? Well, we don't. It's something where Jews inflict our own punishment on ourselves. We call it guilt. Anybody who's ever had a Jewish mother knows what that means. My view of it is I prefer to look at it as guilt. For those who speak Yiddish, money. So money damages are where we look at under Jewish law. That's the only compensation. However, we do know that Talmud and Torah say an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Does that mean we really want vengeance? Traditionally, any Jewish court that sentenced anybody to death more than once was considered a terrible court. Jews fundamentally did not believe in death penalties. Even though it was specified, even though it said you could, the communities did not like to do that. So they had special cities, sanctuary cities, where people could go if they accidentally killed somebody. But interestingly enough, they could only live in that city as long as the rabbi was alive. When the rabbi of that city, the high priest, sorry, the Gadol, the high priest, when that priest died, then the sanctuary city went on to somebody else. So there are various things where we overlap and consider what we should be doing. One of the other things that happens in artificial intelligence is what I mentioned earlier, talk about having a rabbi make a sermon, is we don't have an Neshama. We don't have a system where that artificial intelligence can think within itself, at least yet, where that artificial intelligence can think within itself, am I doing the right moral thing? I'm not going to tell you it's impossible to teach a computer that. It probably is, because I've seen some people who are just as difficult to teach moral ethics to as machines. And I'm not going to go into politics at all. But some people tell me artificial intelligence means politicians. I wouldn't say that necessarily. There are some good politicians. Given all of that, we have the concept of Tselem Elohim, that the humans are created in the image of God. We cannot say that about computers. The computers are not created in the image of God. To this day, I don't understand why people who deal with robotics and programming think they have to make the robotic device walk as if it's a human being. It strikes me it's much easier to put it on wheels and treads and just send it wherever we have to send it. But somehow there's still this concept of trying to make things look human. We are not Hashem. Bill?
It's the idea that acceptance that won't look so far into somebody. So they say, let's make it in the image of the person that's actually looking at it.
Understood. And the problem with that is there are those of us who look at it and say, that's so clumsy looking. How do you want that device taking care of you when you don't know whether it's going to trip because you don't know how well balanced it is? Yes,
That goes back to Japan, where they're having a problem managing to take care of all of their elderly. They revere their elderly. And in many cases, their elderly have, as we would have an aide, their elderly have machines that will pick things up for them and do things for them and so on. But in comparison, they also will have children from nursery school visiting the elderly and spending some time just playing in the house. So there is a human component.
well, interestingly enough, though that's out of the topic area, the Federation on 95th Street is so integrated that it has special needs people dealing with the elderly, and the elderly with the special needs people helping one another, giving each other a sense of value. And that is something that computers, at this point, you notice my phrase, at this point, are unable to do. Eric.
So you said that one thing that we can't do with AI, no matter how hard we try, humans were created in the image of God. But that's taking the word image as a literal word. And it means more than just the looks.
I'm not using the word looks. Don't forget, we as Reform think of the image of God as a deity that we don't look at. We don't picture God having written the entire Talmud or Torah the way the Orthodox do. We think that is divinely inspired. What the divinity is, nobody that I know yet has been able to tell me. So that's part of the thing with Reform Judaism versus conservative and Orthodox Judaism. And in effect, you really do have a separate set of rules as to how the Orthodox are going to look at artificial intelligence versus how the Reform and conservative do. Because there is a basis in Orthodoxy for saying this world really didn't exist more than 6,000 years ago. And we know, in fact, as recently as this week, they found tools that are approximately 5 million years old. Now, how they define a tool, it was a piece of a rock cut down to be used as a knife. This is just in something I was reading today, in fact. And they have determined that it was from a society that was about 5 million years, predated what is now we consider Homo sapien. They weren't humans as we know humans. They were sort of like the ones in Washington. And they were more animalistic. But what they did was they determined that those fine rocks could be used to cut the meat or the flesh off of animals. And that's when they started eating animals and got away from the vegetables and got away from the animals. I got to the animals and then started a whole new society. So according to artificial intelligence theories, that could be replaced by what the computers can now do. Because what we see as a modern computer is going to get even smaller. There's a new material that not new anymore, something called graphene. Buckyballs is older. Graphene is a single molecular layer of graphite. It is so thin that you cannot see it unless it's laid down on something, on a surface. And it's like something that Al Capone's invented in the cartoon. Because if you turn it in one direction, it's a conductor. If you turn it in another direction, it's an insulator. If you put it in a golf ball, it stabilizes it. If you put it in concrete, it keeps it from flaking or spalling for longer periods of time. You get a question?
Not a question, it's a comment. It was also found, but I don't know how many millions of years or whatever, I think it's 6 million years maybe, two pieces of wood attached together as you would in a teepee pole. And they were definitely cut by human.
Well, there are lots of things. We have no idea in truth as to how society and civilization developed. Because one of the things, for example, is if there's a picture of an elephant in the middle of the desert and a whale in that same spot, how did the whale picture show up in the middle of the desert? We don't know where the water even was at that time. So we know that there are things that go on in the world that we still can't explain, probably never will. Because how do you go back 6 to 8 million years and say, this is what happened? You can say, this is what we think happened. This is what it looks like happened. I don't know anybody here that's that old. So I don't see how they recorded any of this. And that's the fascinating part about artificial intelligence, is to watch how it develops. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with how it works, and I don't care how well one is versed in this, but think of it this way. Computer A speaks to computer B. Computer B doesn't like what computer A says, so it goes to computer C. And it develops its own circle of friends. And they call that machine learning. And given how one machine learns from another, they proceed to do this by something called a neural network. A neural network is how one's mind is supposed to work. You have the neural system in your brain, and it's supposed to simulate that and be able to exchange information and learn from one another, and then go gather data from another set of computers, which is the LLM, which is the learning mechanism. And all of this started with something called an algorithm, which is the written instruction that told the computer what to do to begin with. Now, the fascinating part about algorithms is everybody thinks that's the old system. The old system of programming a computer was going behind the computer into the wires, like a telephone switchboard. And whenever there was supposed to be a signal of the one, somebody would put in power. And whenever there was no signal, they would disconnect the power. And those are called and or circuits, basically, but they were the binary system of ones and zeros. And that was done by a human, not writing out instructions, but by physically doing it on the computer. And then the modern system is the algorithm. In between, there were punch cards and magnetic tapes and a few other systems that nobody ever worked with. And the first computer of the size that we talk about as being the laptop actually came out of, I believe, Radio Shack. And they were the small vacuum tube computers. And if you were lucky, they had 120K memory, 120,000 bits of memory, not 5 trillion, the way we have today in this little solid state drive that we plug in. So it's an amazing progress that we've seen. And the intelligence of the artificial intelligence is going to continue to develop. And again, this isn't a personal opinion. Everybody panics whenever something new comes out. There is no question in my mind. It's going to change the nature of the workforce. It's going to change the nature of education. Stop and think of what our kids are doing today. If they want to write a paper, they call up a chatbot. They call up an artificial intelligence site and said, write me a paper about the history of the World War II. What they forget is that their teacher also has access to the same one and said, what does a cheater look like writing a paper like that? And you can literally use the same system to make sure the kids don't cheat. Now, cheating to me is not learning about it. It's using somebody else's material to write the paper. I'm in favor of letting the kids go online and learn from that. That's like having a private tutor. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think we're going to see more and more of that happening. What we don't want is the children to then take that information and present it as if it's their own. We want them to learn from that and combine it with other things they may have learned. So as I pointed out, doing research means cheating with 10 other people, not just one. So if you go back and you do your research and you go into the artificial intelligence, you're able to expand on it. Another thing we're going to be losing is privacy. I don't know how many of you realize that your car probably spies on you as we speak. Not only does your car do that, but if any of you have the kind of system that is voice activated in your home, that's being recorded. We found out recently that I think it was Amazon was actually keeping series recordings of what you, my wife says Apple, I always believe her. She's never wrong. And that's why we've been married 51 years. Is that 52? No, 51. And
It was people interacting with Siri.
Siri,
Siri would take conversations and actually use that to be able and take the information people were plugging into it and feed that to Apple's data mechanism.
perfect. And that's, in fact, the Tesla that blew up had recordings in it as to where the vehicle had been. And Musk was able to tell the FBI where that vehicle had traveled based on information that got out of the vehicle. And it was mentioned that it came, the Apple was Sirius. Sirius was taking the information and recording it and keeping it and using it in places where they lied to us that it shouldn't have been.
So it created a huge gap in the privacy because we believe as users, when people put their information in, that they're secure, that they have, when you're interacting with any sort of digital media, there is a rule of privacy that the consumer and the seller agree to. And because of Apple using this, and whether it was greed or whatever, they violated that Privacy Act, which is our right as people to do. This is the same thing, though, also with AI. So with AI, you mentioned before that plagiarism is like taking from one person, and research is by taking from many people and coming with your own idea and your own summary of what that is. When it comes to AI doesn't care where it comes from. AI will take out from wherever the data has been fed from, and will create whatever sort of picture it wants out of who knows how many sources, but it won't tell you, and it won't check for accuracy. And the people who are interacting with it, these people who are, young kids such as myself, believe me, we've used ChatGPT in our classes. So I definitely speak about this. They don't check where it comes from. But what we've been seeing now is that a lot of people who are using this, it's not only that this next thing they're calling for cheating. We have a new issue where the digital privacy rights of the people who wrote this information that's not necessarily publicly accessible is being accessed by AI, and that their IP, their rights to their IP is being stolen or being used without permission right from under them.
That is perfectly leading me to my next area. That's IP. And IP means intellectual property. So whenever you do anything, you've written something, you automatically have a right to it under intellectual property law. That law varies from country to country, even though there are treaties. For example, right now, Mickey Mouse is going into the public domain.
Oh, damn.
In another year, you'll be able to use Mickey Mouse any way you want. Instead of just referring to some of our synagogue life as a Mickey Mouse life, you'll be able to use it in very specific applications. Somebody once said the Arabs asked for Mickey Mouse outfit, so they offered them Raytheon. But we don't know that to be a fact. I can tell no engineers here, nobody got that one. That the idea being that what we are seeing is something, again, that is Talmudic. Talmudic actually gives a right of privacy to people. And a lot of our intellectual property law is based on Talmudic law again. So for example, your own photograph is your property. AI can use that photograph. The problem is, if they got the photograph in a public place, then it's whoever took the picture's property. And as soon as you take a photograph, if it is public, it is presumed that you have the right to do with it. If you go into somebody's backyard and shine a camera into their house and take a picture, then you have violated that person's privacy rights. Now, they don't talk about photographs, obviously, in Talmud, but they do talk about images of human beings. I'm not sure how they come about with that, but they do talk about images. Maybe just paintings, and maybe that was the whole idea of it. But the Talmud talks about a right of privacy. And to add to that, they talk about damages if that right of privacy is invaded. But again, I keep emphasizing the point, and that is, we can tell people you're not supposed to do it, but you can't keep them from doing it. And that's part of what goes on with much of what we do, even in our criminal system today, but it goes on and has gone on in the Jewish system of ethics and law, is we can tell people what's right. We can tell people what to do. Well, a lot of times there's no punishment for that. That is practical and rational. He's going to bring you a mic, Jane.
I was just wondering, you said Mickey Mouse will go into the public domain and we can use Mickey Mouse. What do you mean we can use Mickey Mouse?
You want to do an advertisement for the temple that shows us as a Mickey Mouse place? Would you like to do an advertisement for some children's books that say, we're just like Mickey Mouse? Well, in another year, you'll be able to do that. Right now, all we can do is, this year, what became public is the predecessor to Mickey Mouse. And I don't remember the term they used for it. But the way we work with copyright law.
Steamboat Willie.
Steamboat Willie, very good. That what preceded the current copyright law is you were granted a copyright. Well, that's changed. That's been something in flux. Some places it's 95 years. Some places it's 25 years. In US right now, it's the lifetime of the author plus, I think it's 95 years. So it's a very long time. But Rabbi.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, a few days younger. Here's a good example of what you're just saying here in our state. I'm going to read a part of a statement. Under Florida law, email addresses are public records. And the next statement is, if you do not want your email address released in response to this, then do not use it in correspondence.
And there is a secondary problem with that. One talks about the fact that we can tell people that in theory, our phone numbers are private and we are on a do not call list. Exactly how much good does that do to them? With the spam calls that you're getting with simulated numbers that actually don't even exist as the call. So we have no idea how far technology is going to push us and what we're going to end up doing. All we can do is try to work the way Jewish law says, is the ethics and the rebuilding of the world that took along, and understanding that there has to be a feeling with it. Rabbi had a comment.
There was an article in Newsday today about the concern with the cars being able to pick up our personal information. Talked about that already. Do you think that, given obviously the immense pressure of the economy of Tesla, et cetera, do you think that our American society will be able to deal with that?
No. To be honest with you, unfortunately, the bottom line appears to be money talks. And it talks louder than almost anything else we get to do. Okay?
Finish your point, because money talks in the point.
No, it's basically, that's all one can say. It's reality.
Money talks. And our education system is based on incentives that no longer. So I'm an educator, and my student actually got caught cheating, copying a paper using ChatGPT. How this got by me is a different story. It had 10 paragraphs and he needed 5, but I shouldn't have. But there are so many incentives in education. Luckily, right now, I don't deal with this, but in the future, the grading system is kind of archaic. And how do you, in the face of artificial intelligence, it sounds stupid, but how do you incentivize kids to feel what I felt and probably Andrew felt, and it would probably last of it for now, but how do you make them realize learning is fun and worthwhile and? Yeah,
Interesting that you say that. We had the privilege of having our grandnephew and grandniece visiting us. And they are both very much interested in learning. Neither of them are the kind of kids who would like to go out and play with 10 other kids. One of them, in fact, would rather pick up a book and go study something than play any game whatsoever. There are parents who are capable of incentivizing their children by their own personal behavior. I don't think there is a way that you can teach a parent to be a parent. I think the children teach parents to be parents. One of the things I say frequently is I judge a parent not so much on what their children do, but what their grandchildren do. Because what I've seen is the parent, the first of the generation that I know, teach their children, who then pass that on to the other children. And that tells me they've incentivized their children correctly because they're able to pass that on to a generation. Now, that's kind of far-fetched. I understand that. That's typical of my reasoning, where I put my hand around this to scratch the other side of my head. I don't necessarily arrive at things in a straight line. And part of that probably is why I'm both an engineer and a lawyer. Because you talk about two totally different ways of learning. But in reality, both require proof. And what you do as an engineer is you're looking for proof. What you do as a lawyer, you're looking for proof. And in each case, you're learning in a different direction. To add to that, I've been lucky enough to have a father who taught me Talmud without realizing I was learning Talmud, by telling me stories as a child, that when I went to study Talmud, I said, oh, I know that story. My father taught me that. And but again, I'm going to tell you, I didn't accomplish all of this on my own. What I did is by pure luck, by having people around me who were willing to spend time with me. And given that, that's the reason Helena and I like to travel so much. When we travel around the world, the people we meet just provide us with such information and such education that we've been from China to Africa to Jordan, the Middle East, Israel, Europe, and places. And what you find is the same thing. People basically want to be left alone and want to be able to enjoy life. Very few people, to say the music out of South Pacific, don't get born hating. They learn to hate. And if we can change that by even artificial intelligence to learn the correct way, or at least, again, and remember, that depends on who programs the computer. I've seen people compute on different levels. I've seen people who can take a computer and accomplish something in 5 steps. And I've seen others who would take 25 steps to do the same thing. The one who does the 25 steps will tell you they're doing that to assure accuracy. The one who does it in 5 steps is saying, I'm doing that to assure efficiency. Both are right. Both have different goals. Right? Can't remember? Your voice projects can't, you don't have to worry about it.
I want to bring you back to the beginning. We talk about AI,
Genesis.
artificial intelligence. What is your definition of intelligence?
Mine or the computer's?
No, the question is, if the computer is only giving you back the Encyclopedia Britannica in a way that's easier to get at, is that artificial intelligence? And the other part is, how can you ever teach a computer to be ethical in its decisions? Because you can have 5 people and 5 people can't agree on what is ethical in a particular situation. So that's why we have, you talk about appeals courts of 3, appeals courts of 9. a 7, so that, because computers can't do that.
And therein lies betting, and therein lies, the rabbi has taught us many times. If you don't like the answer you get from one rabbi, you go to another rabbi.
But you're not supposed to do that.
There are lots of things in the world we're not supposed to do that we do to get different answers. And your point is excellent. It's a well-taken point. And the only way I can describe it is, don't forget, something like an encyclopedia is a database. That's where we put information. In theory, the artificial intelligence goes to different databases to gather the information, compare it, and then relies on another database that tells it how to evaluate it. No, I know where you're going. I think I know where you're going, and I hope I'm answering you. But what's going to happen is, it depends who gives that database its answer. And the only thing we can do, and that's why I say, and I honestly believe this, I don't believe artificial intelligence can ever effectively replace human beings, because there is no soul, there is no nefesh, there is nothing that says this is what Hashem says to us, or whatever our divinity belief is the right way to do it. And for as much as we joke about it, when you have 5 Jews, you have 6 opinions. Where it goes off to every other religion, it's not just Jews that do this. People, as human beings, perceive things differently. I'm not a psychologist, and I never played one on television. I never stayed at a Holiday Inn with one. And the whole idea is that there are different levels of psychology that are going to be analyzed, that people are going to use. I don't mean to be looking at that side. That seems to be where all the questions are. But everybody here understands that within this room, we will look at the same information and view it differently. And there's always the story of the automobile accident, where you get the witness on the stand, and the witness will tell you what happened. And then you get another witness who will tell you exactly the opposite of what happened, because that person is standing on the other side of the street. Or somebody was sitting next to you and may have a cataract and perceive the color of the car differently. So for every type of witness you have multiple explanations. And for every time I've had a witness on the stand who alleged to be an expert, I could always find holes in that expert's testimony, because nobody knows everything there is to know about anything. I don't care how good anybody is. I don't care how brilliant they are. You can't know all there is to know. Rabbi?
But we are getting into a realm which really is fraught with so much danger. I just pulled up those of you read Asimov's wonderful book, I, Robot. And in the book, there are 3 laws of robotics. The one is a robot may not injure a human being, or through interaction allow a human being to come to harm. Okay. 2, a robot must obey the orders given to it by human beings. Okay. But you have number 3, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection, and that's the key, because once you put into the robot the ability to evaluate what is affecting its own existence, that's of course in that book when you had the robots going nutso, and that's the danger. And it was interesting as we're moving into this realm. And they are attempting to put the ability of robots to pick up on human emotions and interact with them. And as you say, if you don't have a neshama, how can you do that? You don't know what's true anymore on the internet, to say the least. But I remember reading this article, I think it was in France, where the Siri is actually now being trained or programmed to pick up on human emotions. And so there was this adult male who was very depressed, and he'd come home and talk to this Siri and share his feelings of what he was going through every day. And he would come home, and after going through this whole emoting, he would then say, "No, something, I want to just kill myself." Well, this went on apparently for a couple of days, and Siri apparently said to him, why am I even saying Siri says it? Okay, Siri said to him, "You know something, I'm tired of hearing you say it. Why don't you do it already?" The guy killed himself.
I saw that exactly.
So all the things that you're saying are wonderful, but what is society doing to prevent this going over the deep end, you know?
Let me touch on two things so I don't lose track of everything I want to say. First thing is, the US has no national law dealing with artificial intelligence. The EU does. And the EU has set up a European-wide legal basis for controlling artificial intelligence. I don't know how good it is because it's relatively new. The second thing is that when we talk about AI, it is so broad. It's like talking about the Industrial Revolution. It's still going on. And we have no concept of where this is going to end. And one of the things that I want to go back to that I said right at the very beginning is almost everything we do changes the world some way. Whether it's the Industrial Revolution, where Ford set up a production line that changed labor standards, or whether it's the one now where COVID changed the way we work, where half of us stay home to work. For example, I'm hearing a case in arbitration tomorrow. I don't even have to put on clothes. All I have to do is put on a jacket to look civilized. Now, I don't do things like that because you never know where cameras change. And there's no way I'm going to do something that stupid to embarrass myself. But I don't go into courts. Very rarely do I have to show up for a hearing. 90% of what I do as an arbitrator is done online. And the downside of that is you cannot see real body motion. So you really can only see the face of the person who is testifying. And there's a lot in body dynamics that tells you what a witness is feeling that you don't get to see if you're just hearing this online. Somebody else had a question now.
Yeah.
George?
This reminds me of, it's about something that sometimes in describing my belief in God, for instance, and challenging people who say, well, what about this and what about that? And to describe God's intelligence, I say, here's my metaphor. You can imagine a computer today. Now imagine one 50 years ago. Can you even describe the difference in its power? Now, how about if you project that computer to 5,000 years from now? Can you even do one drop of that ocean of leap? That gives you a sense of what you could be dealing with trying to contemplate the mind of the Almighty, so to speak. So in artificial intelligence, I think we are hampered by our present imagination to even imagine where it could go 10 years from now because of its learning curve. But I think that with my 5,000-year example, the Neshama problem can become maybe 200-300 years from now a solved issue, in a manner, speaking sarcastically. But that's just my metaphor for dealing with you.
Now you understand why I respect George and like to have his opinions.
The American Medical Association has been grappling with this kind of a thing because artificial intelligence is now trying to read cameras. This way? Okay. Okay. Is now trying to read X-rays and MRIs and interpret them. But if you put the wrong code in, they will interpret them backwards. And therefore, if there has to be a hearing of some kind having to do with medical malfeasance, and it deals with the way that this MRI or piece of medical technology was read, then you cannot depend upon that if it is done by the machine. So the AMA is telling doctors that they should make their own assessment aside from using the assessment made by the machine, because that is the only way that they can be safe.
Well, you probably have heard me mention this before, but there was a situation where an attorney decided to have AI do a brief for him. And the brief was beautifully written. The problem was the AI made up cases that didn't exist. And the attorney was held in contempt of court. So we do, at least at this point, still need the human involvement Andrew, did you have something?
Yeah, so this is actually it's great that you brought this in, because I was gonna connect this to what Rabbi was saying before. That what AI, the way how we see AI now, that we're seeing that it's not a perfect system. Because it's basically run through these complex algorithms, and it can create predictions that can lead to very, very grossly overestimated fabrications. And I just wanted to, ask, as we try to bridge and create this interconnectedness between AI and Judaism, say that, we want to bring AI more involved, we want to create AI generated lessons, just for instance, right now, it's because a human is like Rabbi is giving us these sermons that we're able to treat them as is, because they're well educated, they're informed, they've learned through their parents and through the texts that they've read personally, what is said there, what is written. But AI isn't necessarily going to know that. If we were to take, AI, based lessons, would AI basically create alterations of our history? Because ultimately, it's now down to the young people after, once hand over the torch to us to continue preserving the history of Judaism and its heritage. And one of my fears is that once it's in our hands, the closer we get it together, how do we create a respect between AI and the laws of Judaism, so that Judaism is respected and the history that is brought in is not changed or altered in any way?
You bring up an excellent point, and I want to make sure I cover two issues before. This has been great. Everybody's contributing. It's been fabulous. But two things we have to remember. One is that Judaism itself has a historical requirement of informing the world. We were not chosen because we were special. We were chosen to teach the world moral ethics. And that's an important aspect that I think many of us lose sight of. And given that, that's an important aspect of AI, is that it is incumbent upon the human being, and not to exclude the rest of the civilization that doesn't believe in Judaism, but it's upon civilization itself and the human being to create the atmosphere where AI is useful and not destructive. The problem is we never know what's going to be destructive until it destroys. We think of things as being useful, and then it backfires. And this is part of our history. And one other thing I wanted to remind people about is the responsa. For those of you who are familiar with responsa, it simply means that a legal decision effectively is given by a rabbi based on a question. Well, AI is now doing the responsa in many cases. It can't do it for Orthodox, again, because Orthodox separate themselves as to their view of what is a neshama, what has a soul. And I'll digress for that in a minute on that part. But given that, the responsa is probably one of the places that AI could be used successfully, because it can research information in a database and tell us what historically Judaism has said about something. It does not give us the exact answer to a question that has its own unique characteristics, because nothing can do that. And one of the things that we always have to remember is that we talk about the human soul, but we don't know enough, or at least I don't, to be able to say to you, well, this is what my soul is like, and this is what I did the last time I came around. Because if you talk to people who believe in reincarnation, many of them will tell you, we've been here before, we've done this before, and we're here to learn from our mistakes the last time. I even had a Chabad rabbi tell me that each of us is required to perform all 613 mitzvot, and that most of us are here because we've already done the ones that require the temple's presence. So now we're back doing the rest of them. I'm not going to tell you what I believe or don't believe. I'm just telling you what I've been informed. And there are many things that we can look at and say, Yes, I can see that argument and I can see that position. Don't ask me to make a decision on it. It doesn't affect what I'm going to do tomorrow, and it's only going to make me sugar today. With that, I've hit the 1 hour limit. And being a typical engineer, I do like to do things on time. I thank you all very much for your contributions. You've been fantastic with your work. It's a pleasure.
On behalf of Brotherhood, we want to thank Sid for his very intellectual conversation and everybody who participated. There will be dessert and coffee in that, and I'm sure Sid will take any questions from people who didn't want to speak out in private or public. Again, thank you, Sid. Thank you.
Thank you.